Today's date is October 11th, 2023, and we are in the state of North Carolina. And introduce yourself, sir.
I'm Robert Huddleston. I live at 131 Carolina Meadows. I've lived here about, maybe 15 years. I was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee, but I lived in St. Joseph, Missouri most of my early years.
And I've got a picture of some pretty lady above you. Tell me when you married her and give me her name and how many years you married to that lady. Tell us her whole name.
My former wife, Pepita LaSalle, we met in 1973 in Washington, D.C. At that time, I was a 50-year-old bachelor. She had been married for 10 years and divorced. We met, I courted. I met her mother. Unfortunately, I did not meet her father. He died the same month we were married. He was a very interesting person, and I published a book about him.
We're going to talk about that a little later. And this man's picture over here on the wall, who's he related to? This gentleman over here.
That's my father-in-law, which a man I've never met, but as I say, I found his life so interesting, I published a book about him. He was an American spy during the Second World War, and other talents that I found very interesting.
And say his first and last name.
Well, it's a long name, but it's Edmundo LaSalle. Without reading it, I don't remember all the add-ons to it. But he was a Mexican national, actually not of Spanish descent, but French. There was a large French Huguenot group in New Mexico, and that's part of his ancestry. He's a fascinating person, and he was married to my wife's mother at the time of World War II. He went away to Europe representing the United States Army. He met a German princess and married her. That was the second of his 4 wives.
Born in 1914 and died in 1974. Lived to be 60 years of age.
Yes.
Okay. That's a little bit of your heritage, but Bob, tell us about how you grew up in St. Joe, Missouri. That's not a real big town. It's in the western part of Missouri, north of Kansas City, about 70 miles. Tell us about St. Louis, or St. Joe, Missouri.
The Huddleston family had a farm in eastern Tennessee, and I was actually born in Knoxville. My father was the elder son, but he did not like farming. So he almost served in World War I. He got his draft orders, but the war ended and he escaped military service. He did not want to be a farmer. He had a favorite uncle that had moved to St. Joseph, Missouri, so Dad just followed him there, and is in St. Joe. In the late 1990s, early 1920s, he met my mother in St. Joe and married her. And my older sister was the first child, and she was born in Omaha. I have no idea what his employment was. He did not prepare himself with a marketable training. He was a jack of all trades and terribly undereducated. He could do a little carpentry, a little plumbing, what little things you had to do on a farm. But other than that, he he was not a well-trained, employable father. That's a little criticism, but he deserved it.
So the Huddlestons evolved from Tennessee and went there. He came from Tennessee.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your mother's family in St. Joe.
It's a German family. Fred Hagen,
Her maiden name was Hagen.
her maiden name was Hagen, and her father immigrated from Germany after World War I and went to Chicago at the beginning, and most of the Germans that immigrated seemed to pass through Chicago. So it was in Chicago that Fred Hagen met my mother. Matilda was her first name. And I have forgotten just where in Germany they immigrated from, but apparently the word was out in Chicago that St. Joseph was a good place for Germans. It actually had a German newspaper before World War II, and a German-American bank, and all that, of course, literally went underground in World War I. The Germans weren't too popular, so they didn't broadcast their heritage. But Fred Hagen was a farmer, and he died very young, so I knew little about him, and I just know of my German heritage, and that's it. On my father's side, the family was strictly English and settled in this country, and as best I can figure out, it was about the 1700s. They came from near Cambridge, England. Is the best. I tried to track them down once, and I did some research, but they didn't have much information on the underclass, and the Huddlestons were certainly of the underclass of the English.
Did they come through Ellis Island or through the Carolinas, through Boston, or through New Orleans, or do you know?
They came through Ellis Island, but I'm not sure. It was the same story. They had to move south trying to find cheap land, and the family, the Huddleston family, apparently was fairly large. There were at least two brothers, we know that, and they headed south, and my ancestor found cheap land in and around eastern Tennessee. Now the other Huddleston is very interesting because he went on to Alabama. His name was George Huddleston, and in the 1930s he became a congressman and represented the area around Birmingham, Alabama. He was, for a Southerner, he was rather liberal. He was a Democrat, but well, I'll just say he was a very interesting character.
How many years was he senator? 6 years or 12?
Oh, I think he went possibly 12. He sold himself to his constituency. He didn't get along well with the Democratic president named Roosevelt. He was very critical of him.
Now, you lived in St. Joe. How many siblings did you have, and did any of them go to World War II, or what did your siblings do in World War II? And what did your mom and dad do during World War II?
I have an older sister that actually the firstborn was a boy and he didn't survive, but my sister was 2.5 years older, and since Dad didn't have any real employment during the Depression, when in 1940, when the defense buildup came about, he knew he could get employment in California, just so in 1940 he moved to San Diego, and he did get employed by the aircraft factory there. My mother stayed in St. Joe. I was in my final year in high school, Central High School, during Pearl Harbor, so I knew where I was going. And unfortunately, when I graduated from high school, I was under the impression you couldn't get into flight school without 2 years of college, but they had changed that. There just weren't that many candidates for all the aircraft being constructed, so they dropped the 2 years and required a written test. Oh, I didn't find out about that until after I graduated, and late in 1942, I found out that they dropped the 2-year requirement and that you could take the written test at a small airfield about 30 miles away in Kansas, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So a friend of mine was a year older with an automobile, said, hell, we'll go take the test there at that little airfield. So we did. We walked in and the lieutenant said, yes, I can give you the test. So he separated us, put us each in a room, took the test. Afterwards, he graded it and he said, I passed. My friend with the automobile didn't. So he said, come back a week from now and you'll be examined by a flight surgeon. So I had to, when, of course, the guy with failed the test had the automobile, so I had to hitchhike to Fort Leavenworth to take the test. He said, well, we're going to swear you into the enlisted reserve so you won't get drafted, and you just simply have to wait till there's room in the flight schools. But you are, or you will be, a flying cadet.
So, what was your birth date there, Robert?
June 4, 1924.
24. So you are now 99 years of age.
I am. Come June 4, I'll be all of 100.
Mm-hmm. And you said you had a sister that was 2.5 years older.
She died about 5 years ago.
But what did she do in St. Joe during the war, and what did your mother do during the war? Did you have any other siblings?
Okay, my dad went to San Diego in 1940, and my sister went to L.A. where she stayed with a cousin that lived in L.A., and she was a well-trained secretary, so she had no trouble getting a job. And my mother stayed with me until I finished Central High School. Then she went to San Diego to join my father. And I went initially to San Diego, and I was drafted. I wasn't drafted. I registered for the draft, but the draft board seemed to favor those 19-year-olds before he took the 18-year-olds. So when I learned that, I decided I'd go back to St. Joe until I got drafted. But meanwhile, that's when I found out I could take the examination and get in flight school. So I followed that path. I had to work in St. Joe for a while before they didn't call me into active duty until the 1st of February 1943, and they still didn't have room in the flight in the flight training school. So they developed a program where they signed up hundreds of future flying cadets, and they sent them to college. But by taking the oath of office into the Army and sending them to college, the draft board couldn't touch us. It was a deal to keep the Army Air Corps from losing us. They stockpiled us in colleges around the country. I published a very interesting article about that. It was published in Air Power History, but it was a devious plan to keep us from being drafted or recruited by the Navy.
Was that a V-12 program?
No.
What kind of program was it?
It was called the College Training Program. Mm-hmm. And they just lined up 140 small colleges. Some put us in regular classes, some devised classes. It wasn't to educate us, it was to hold us until we could get into flight training.
Where did you go to school during that time? Do you recall?
The college was Ouachita College in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and they were 250 in my contingent.
You were there about 3 months from February till.
It was set up for 5 months, but they wanted to phase us into the program, so 50 left after 1 month, 50 after 2, and I was in the third group, and I had went, 50 of us went on to San Antonio. That was the next stage of classification.
And so that would have been about May of 43.
Yes.
May of 44. May of 40.
May of 43.
May of 43, then you get to San Antonio, and that
For classification.
classification, and tell us
And
about.
took the test, and I was classified for pilot training, and I went into pre-flight in San Antonio, and I was in class 44D. That meant I would get my wings in 1944 in April, but something happened in pre-flight. I flunked mathematics. So I was held over one flight, and I actually wound up in 44E, which meant I would get my wings in May of 1944, and I did.
Now, you got your wings in 44. We're going to hold a plane up, and this is a P-13 plane right by your shoulder there. That P-13. I don't know if you see that. You see that?
Oh yeah, we call that the VULT vibrator.
No, the VULT vibrator is the next one over.
Okay,
The first
yes.
one you did was the P-19.
Yes.
Okay, can you remember anything what you did in the P-19? Tell us about that. Your first flight, your first 10 hours, probably in that.
Yeah, it was no problem. I had a good instructor, and soft-spoken, and I went through the primary quite with no problems. I loved that airplane, even though it had a fixed landing gear.
Was it scary your first time up? And did you get your wings after 10 hours, or how many hours of flying?
No. Actually, under the college training program at Ouachita College, the Army Air Corps arranged for a flight. I don't remember, it was in a cover, just to give us the feel of flying. And that's where they discovered that some of the candidates got sick and continued to get sick and were washed out. I went through that 10 hours of flying in a little airfield near in Arkadelphia, no problem. So when I got into the primary, my 9 weeks of training was no problem.
What date about did you get your wings, Robert?
I actually got my wings in May of 1944.
A whole year later.
Right, I graduated from Moorfield in southern Texas on the Rio Grande, Moorfield, Texas.
So a year later, but then you put it on the next plane here. This is the vibrator.
Yeah.
Called it, what did you call it, the VULT?
VULT vibrator. That was basic in Enid, Oklahoma.
And you went there
Right.
second. Or
9 weeks.
for 9 weeks to learn how to fly that one. That was a heavier plane made of aluminum and metal, where the other one was just a fabric.
That's right.
Much heavier.
Each stage, primary, basic, advanced, got a more powerful aircraft. So that was semi-good, but it's the next aircraft, the advanced, that was one of the greatest planes produced in World War II.
But before you get there, can you tell us any experiences on the VULT? Did it vibrate? The lid would vibrate people?
No, I think
that was a farce, huh?
I don't think it did. I don't remember it. It was just another aircraft with more power, had a fixed landing gear, I had a good instructor. It went well.
In 1943, there were about 93,000 cadets that tried to become a flyboy, and only 10,000 of them passed. So you're
Well,
one of about 10% that passed, but you saw a lot wash out from either being air sick or didn't pass the grades or couldn't fly right. Did you see, like 70-80% of your classmates had to flunk out?
It depends on the instructor. Now, in primary, we had civilians. As I remember, he was a prince of a guy. The instructor was a lieutenant, and the military instructors were pissed off. They didn't want to be instructors. They wanted to get to Europe and be an ace. This guy, as I recall, was okay. But when I got the instructor advance,
This is a T6. This is a
that's a wonderful aircraft.
T6. That's the T6, and that most pilots went through what you just said. They went through the Vulcan. They used a Stearman as the first one. Some of them did
The
Stearman.
Navy used that.
The Stearman, but Army used.
I like this. A rugged airplane. Good airplane.
So the Stearman, and then it went to the. Some of them used that instead. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Now, tell us about the T6 there, Robert. You really like that.
That was a great airplane, and I had one of the worst instructors they ever assigned there. He was a little guy, very unhappy with his lot, and he gave me a fit. And he finally grounded me because when we were doing formation by then, it was the tail end of advance, and he'd yell at everybody in the fort, "Get up here, do that." Fortunate for me, he grounded me because he had to ferry a plane. And another instructor came along. I'm sitting there dejected in my flying suit, and he said, "What are you waiting for?" He said, "I'm grounded." He said, I've only got 3. I need a 4th pilot. You're coming with me. Yes, sir. So I flew with him, had no problems. When my instructor got back, he was mad as hell because I had flown, and the instructor said, "That guy has no problem, you're the problem." And that's the way flying was in those days. You had to have a good instructor. He was lousy. Anyway, I graduated.
Then your next plane that we see here is over here, a P-40.
Oh, I love that
The
aircraft.
P-40, before the
loved it.
P-47. Tell us your experiences in a P-40.
The P-40 was the first aircraft you flew without an instructor. All you got was a cockpit check. And they were old clunkers, but that was the most thrilling flight I ever had. Because I say, you go up the first time all by yourself. You pass your cockpit check, and the last words of the instructor says, "Look, if that engine fails on takeoff, don't turn. Fly right into the ground and you'll be okay."
And you flew probably 10 hours in each plane.
10
About.
hours. Well, no, more than that in flying. I can't tell you anymore how much. I do know I got 10 hours we got 10 hours before we went to Harding Field to find out the aircraft we'd taken to combat. We got 7 days delay en route, so I was able to go back to St. Joe and brag about flying a fighter aircraft. I think they planned it that way.
That's a pretty big honor, though.
It
And
was.
there's the P-47. We're spending a lot of the time asking about the P-47, and we're going to let you go in detail on that. So,
Right.
But the P-47 we're going to really spend a lot of time on. But we want to go back to the chronology of this, back to when you did all these things. So,
Well, let me go back to the chronology. After my delay in getting to Harding Field, it was in Harding Field, there were 3 aircraft that needed pilots, the P-38, the P-51, and the P-47. And they didn't ask us what we wanted. You eventually were assigned transition training in any one of those 3. And there was another man from St. Joe, a fellow named Bob Cooper, same age, and we graduated from advanced together. He wound up flying P-38s.
so it was either the P-38, the P-40, or the P-40.
No, P-51, not P-40. P-40's not
Right.
it's not up to date.
I see, yeah.
It's obsolete. It would have to be the P-38, P-51, or P-47. And most of the pilots I discovered later on were assigned to train in the P-47 because they were going to need them at and after D-Day with the 9th Air Force.
Okay, so It looks like then you became a P-47 pilot. When's the first time you stepped in a P-47 or you got in a cockpit of P-47? Do you recall?
I recall because I was assigned to Wendover Field in Salt Lake City. Wendover was isolated with the longest runway, I think, in the country, which we liked. I don't really remember anything special about my first flight. We were all concerned that it would go well, and it did. I took off from that long runway and followed instructions and put so much time on and landed, and it was fine.
But the torque on a P-47 is much more than the torque, meaning push you to the side,
Yeah.
than a T6, and probably more than the P-40
Yeah.
that you flew. Tell us about the torque and how much you couldn't see over the dashboard, how you overcame that.
Okay, on the sea, we would line up, we would taxi out with one of the crew flat on the wing, face down, and he could steer the plane, tell me, he could signal me to weave to get to the end of the runway. We were sort of lined up. Felt sorry for those guys, especially in wintertime, but we needed them, we couldn't see.
What part of the wing? Right proximal by the fuselage, right next to where you were? Is that where they would lay on the wing?
Yeah, right on the left wing, yeah. And the torque didn't bother you because you could control over the flap. What's it called? It was
The stick.
well, it wasn't on the stick.
It was a
You
flap.
could yeah, the flap. So I don't recall any great. We knew how to adjust the torque, so we got off okay. I never had any problem.
The rudder, yes.
I did have a problem later on when I had a couple emergencies trading in the P-47. I don't want to criticize the people that produce the aircraft, but somebody didn't do a good job fastening the instruments in the aircraft, because I'm flying along and suddenly fluid hits me in the face. I can't see. And naturally I had the instinct to pull up my goggles, which that was the dumbest thing I could have done. My eyes are full of liquid. The gauge to the hydraulic fluid had not been fastened and broke loose, and suddenly that thing is hitting me in the face. Well, I finally was able to see, and I called the tower immediately, and they said, well, we don't know what it is, but come in for a landing, a power landing. And this is where I really liked that 10,000-foot runway, because I got to where I could see, and I landed in a power landing, and I used up 10,000 feet and jumped out, and there was an ambulance waiting and a flight surgeon, and he quickly got that fluid out of my eyes and followed up and checked me a few days later, and I recovered no problem.
It was a hydraulic gear fluid.
They just didn't fasten it well, and it broke loose, and the power of it just hit me in.
But the wheels were still down on your plane, because the wheels might not have gone down if the hydraulics were lost all the fluid.
Oh, they went
You still
down.
had your wheels
They
down.
went down, gravity drowned it. You just release them, and that weight, they fall into place.
So it didn't necessarily need all the hydraulics.
No problem.
And it would
No,
lock.
I was in air. I was in contact with the tower, and that flight surgeon got on there, and but he said, anyway, come on with the power and get out of that aircraft. I don't know what else. I suppose it could be a gas line. I don't know. Anyway, it was an emergency, and it came out okay.
What was your second thing? You said there was a second emergency or another problem.
Oh, yeah, I'm up just putting some time on the 47, and it was easy. I was in Texas, and I didn't know where I was. You just call the tower, and then you give me a heading, and I come back to the field. Well, in this case, my radio was out. It appears that my generator went out, and I had no contact with the with the tower, and I could have been in Mexico for all I know, but fortunately I spotted a landing strip, and I buzzed it and wiggled my wings. You know, I had problems, and I went around and landed, and it was a generator went out, and they took care of the plane and notified Abilene, Texas, and I needed a new generator, and they were going to put me up for the night. And lo and behold, it happened to be Thanksgiving Day. So anyway, I'm in a flight suit, and there's no way they're going to let me in the officers club wearing a flight suit. I'm thinking. So they couldn't fly the new generator in until the next day. So I went around to the kitchen and talked to the chef, and I says, I got a problem. I'd like a Thanksgiving dinner, and they won't let me in the officers club. So he fed me a Thanksgiving dinner, and they gave me a place to sleep that night in my flight suit.
Now, after you got trained, Robert, after United States, you probably had maybe 100 flights in a P-47 or 50 flights in a P-47 before you went to Europe. And tell us how they got your plane over to Europe, and then what you did in Europe, and tell us about all your European experiences. Try to start chronologically if you can, because there's 38 missions over, there's a lot. And what date did you hit Europe?
The normal amount of flight time in the aircraft you would take into combat was about 75 hours for us, about 50 hours for British flyers, and for the poor guys in the Luftwaffe, it got less and less because they just didn't have the fuel. But I had plenty of time in the P-47. The reason for that is I'm getting my time in at Wendover in Utah. In July of 1944, we're suddenly ordered to pack up and leave. We're not finished. We're not well trained for combat. We packed up and left, and it wasn't until after the war I discovered it's because the Army Air Force wanted that air base to train the B-29s that were going to drop bombs, atomic bombs. It was isolated, it was long, and I didn't know that until anymore. But we were split up and went to different bases to finish our transition, and I was lucky. I went to Abilene, Texas to finish my training. I can't recall just how much in each place, but I had by the time I went to Europe by ship, we didn't fly P-47s to Europe, I had about 100 hours, which was, they were glad to see me. That was amazing, because the more hours you had in training, the better chance you had to survive. That was it. So I enjoyed finishing up in Abilene, even though I had a forced landing there, a couple, because the head of training operations was a major by the name of Robert Johnson. He was the second leading ace in Europe, leading ace being
Gabinski. Gabinski.
Right, and Bob Johnson was second. But we became very well. I trained under him, and then after the war, I got to know him in the P-47 Association. We became very personal friends, and
he had about 17 kills. How many kills did he have? Because Grabitsky had 22 or so,
No,
27?
You're way off.
way off 40.
I don't remember exactly. I think Bob Johnson originally would credit with 28, then they took one away from him because he was the wrong Johnson. He actually left Europe with 27, and he got out of the service and was called back into Korea, but he got no more victories. So he is recorded with 27 aerial victories.
Now, when you trained before you got to Europe, when you trained in Texas, did you learn how to shoot the bullets, and did you drop any skip bombs, and did you ever put extra gas tanks on the bottom?
No extra gas tanks. From Abilene, we went over to an island off the coast of Texas. Matagorda, I think, was the name of it. And that was a firing range, so I don't remember any training in skip bombing. I don't think they had come up with that idea, which is a real story about that. But I did train in dive bombing, which was good because when you wind up in 9th Air Force, most of your missions, you carry two 500-pound bombs. And you better learn how you dive bomb like, I compared it to throwing a softball, because you had to throw those bombs at the target at the right time so you didn't mush into the ground. That 7 tons would mush. So we got our training off the coast of Texas in both dive bombing and gunnery. I was pretty good at gunnery. I admit I had a good record, and we had tow targets too, and the targets were towed by women pilots that were members of the Women's Air Force.
WAS,
Yeah, WAS, you're right. And there was a rumor that those women towing the target would go bare-breasted. It was not true. Okay.
But when they're towing the targets, you could have hit them.
That's right.
How far behind was that target?
You go in and you got to know when to cut off. But there was some risk there, no doubt about it.
Some pilots had to practice with skeet shooting before they went. When they had their bad days, bad weather, that helped you on your estimation of your shooting. A lot of hunters are pretty good at that. Did that help you at all, the skeet shooting?
No, because I didn't have any aerial combat. The only time I ran into in the enemy aircraft, we were 9th Air Force. We were ground support. I usually wound up as tail end Charlie, and I spotted a 109 on the deck, and I called it out to the leader, and he said, "Go get it, but don't take long because you got to rejoin." Well, I peeled off, and unfortunately, I took my eye off him, and he disappeared into a cannon. He was right on the deck, so I rejoined and finished the mission. And the only other time, see, Hitler was literally going mad over the bombing. He sent all the British Luftwaffe fighters to go after the bombers. So in the 9th Air Force, they didn't bother us. I ran into the twin-engine 262. I think that's right. We were escorting, we only had a few escort missions, and we were escorting medium bombers, and we stumbled on them attacking medium bombers, so we went after them, and I went after one that broke away, and I'm climbing, and I got close to him, and about the time I was getting close enough to fire, he just went, he goes 100 miles an hour faster, he's gone, and my bullets are going. like so.
Was he the
Yeah,
two?
they had 100 miles on us.
Was he the 262 jet? Was
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
the 262 jet? So you saw one of those where they came out in 43, 44, 45, but that was a lot faster than what you could keep up with.
Yeah, about 100 miles. You can only win if you call them landing or taking off. And what they did towards my period, and I'm talking about the last 6 months of the war, they would park one of the twin-engine jets in the forest alongside a straight level of the Autobahn. So when it came time to take off, they just wheel it out, get him on the Autobahn, and off he'd go. And of course, he would land and disappear in the tree. Now, if we caught one that came out of the trees, he was a sitting duck. But that was pure luck. We didn't know where they were. Oh, they sent out P-38s to try to spot where they were landing and taking off. I imagine they did in some cases, but not as far as I had any. I never had the experience of seeing one taking off or landing. I just saw the one that was already in the air and 100 miles faster.
When you talk about ground support, that's what your job was. Can you tell us a little bit, describe what ground support is?
Okay. Several ways now. On some cases, we would be sent to a target, supposedly, like a communications center or an air base. I'll tell you about that later.
Were you out of Belgium or out of France or out of England?
Oh, yeah, I reported as a replacement pilot in January of 45 to St. Tron, Belgium, the 404th Fighter Group, a 506 Squadron. And I had my first combat mission on 1 February and had a total of 36 by VE Day.
So you probably went up every third day. Weather
Yeah.
stopped you sometime.
Yeah.
And you go up in 8 of you together, or 10 of you together. How many in your group would go up in a squadron?
Well, a squadron alone mission would be called armed reconnaissance, and we would just be sent out to shoot at what we could find on the road or at an air base. I went on larger missions. See, we had 3 squadrons. So
How many in a squadron? How many planes in a squadron? 18?
no, there were actually, I think there were 25. 25 per squadron, 506, 507, 508, and then a few in headquarters. But I think we had 25. And we had, I think we had as many as 75 actual pilots per squadron. So that give you an idea of how often you would fly a mission. We only had one case where one of our pilots lost his courage and broke down. And the reason for that was a German came up behind him. And now the German fighters, both the Me-109 and the FW-190, were armed with 2 30 calibers in each wing, but two 20 millimeter cannon in the nose. So they had one hell of a lot of power. And one of them, and I don't recall whether it was a 109 or FW-190, but one of them came up unobserved by one of our pilots and clobbered him with the 430s and the 2 cannon. Now behind our seat was a piece of steel about yay thick. I mean, they couldn't, even the cannon couldn't penetrate that. But if you're in that cockpit and those 30 calibers and those cannon shells are hitting that steel, the pilot lost his courage. I mean, he lost his courage. he got back to the base with the plane riddled, really riddled, and he gone. And it took over a week before the operation officer could get him back in an airplane, because he was about to go home. He wouldn't join us in the club. He wouldn't speak to anybody. He couldn't get over that experience. He lost his courage. And by the way, there's a book called The Red Badge of Courage over there that I'm doing another review on. Anyway, it took about a week, and the operations officer finally put him in a Jeep. He drove to the end of the runway, and he gave him a talk and said, look, we're all scared to death. You just have to not imagine what's going to happen and concentrate on what is happening, and you'll get through it. Well, the guy did. Pretty soon he went out, he climbed in the aircraft, he joined up with the flight, and joined us for drinks after it was all over.
Did you ever escort any bombers over there, or did you ever see many bombers on your base?
Oh yeah, we had such a good. St. Tron was a Belgian base, really improved by the Luftwaffe. They made it into a night fighter base, and we had barracks that we called the Wingman's Roost that had steel shutters on the window. They could survive anything. It was a great base, and where were we?
Well, you were.
I lucked out being assigned to the 502. It was a permanent base to Luftwaffe, greatly improved, and we had the 404th housed on one side, and across the big runway, the 48th Fighter Group. So we were both using the same run. It was a great runway and great facility. And I will admit this, we had the best Saturday night dance in Europe. I'm serious. We went out and collected all the nurses that could be relieved from duty. We picked up the best looking Belgian girls we could find, and we had a great Saturday night dance. To the point where we were also an emergency base for bombers that couldn't make it back to England, and they would drop. So we had regular visitors from shot-up bombers, and there was a story going around that one bomber had a little engine problem, but when he climbed out of the aircraft, they all had their dress uniforms on. I don't know if that's true or not, but they did show up at the Saturday night party. And we worked out a deal with the 48th. They would have their party on Wednesday night, so we shared the same women. More or less. Don't misunderstand that word.
Now, Battle of the Bulge happened, and it was a terrible time, and Patton went over and helped save some areas, but there was a break in weather for 7 days or so during the Battle of the Bulge that seemed to help with a lot of aircraft that Patton said it was a miracle time. Do you recall any of your friends saying anything about that?
Yes. When you leave the service, you're given a form that describes all your service, what aircraft you flew, and what battles you were in. I was credited with the Battle of the Bulge. I got to the group one day before, so I didn't fly in the Battle of the Bulge. And all I remember, it was the coldest I've ever been. I mean, it was cold as hell.
December 17th through January 30th or so, but coldest time recorded. And were you in that area at the 30th of January or in December?
Yes, I actually went to Europe on a British ship, and we were, I don't know how many, but there were maybe 100 replacement. But anyway, we went to a replacement depot first in England, and then we were flown to Paris. Now this is after D-Day, and in Paris, they had taken over, they being the Army Air Corps, the 9th Air Force had taken over one of the Rothschild estates. And in there they had a control center. Now when I say we stayed in the Rothschild estate, don't think we had fancy rooms because we stayed in tents and out in the cold. But they had this control room. Have you ever been in a bookie joint? Don't answer that. Anyway, in the bookie joint, they have all the racetracks, and you could place your bets, and they were in contact by telephone. Well, they had a control room in the estate where all the squadrons of the 9th Air Force would send their requirements for replacement. And so when we got settled in, we were flown by cargo plane to Paris. We got settled in. When it came time for us to go to be replacement, we would go in that room and we'd see 50 Squadron needs 2 replacement pilots, 5081, so on. So when our turn came up, I was traveling with a flight officer named O'Connor. So when we went in the room to pick a squadron, we saw that 2 of our friends had gone to the 508th, that was part of the 404th, and they needed 2 replacements at the 506. So we said, we'll take them. So on that basis, this gets a little funny. 2 were needed in St. Tron for the 506, and 2 other flight officers were needed in the 508. So O'Connor's a flight officer. Now, you know what a flight officer is? He's like, I don't know why, he's not a lieutenant. He's like a warrant officer. But I'm the ranking officer, and I'm the most unsophisticated. So when it came time to report to St. Tron, they gave me the orders, and they said, Huddleston, you're in charge. Get them to St. Tron. So they took us by Army vehicle to the railway station in Paris, and I'm fresh out of high school. I don't speak any French. I got to get these guys on the. It was a mess. They were troops going to battle by rail. There were loads of civilians, Belgian and French, that were going back home, even though the war was still on. And I got to wade through all this and get these 3 officers and me to St. Tron, Belgium. I didn't even know where Belgium was. Well, we got on a train in Paris to Brussels. And again, this is part of the Battle of the Bulge, and this is cold. So we got to Brussels, and we learned we couldn't get another train on to St. Tron until the next day. So we got to stay in Brussels overnight. So there's no American units there. The British took Brussels. So, well, we'll just stay at the British officers' quarters. So Huddleston, in charge of 3 flight officers, marched into a hotel for British officers. He explained we wanted rooms, and we finally got out. They're not housing any American officers. Well, we'll have to stay in a hotel. Well, we go in a hotel. It seems we only have French francs. and they're no good. You gotta have Belgian. Well, no, before we went to the hotel, we went to the British Red Cross, and we sort of pleaded, will you find us a place to stay tonight? And they said, no problem, but you have to have Belgian francs. No French francs are acceptable. So we went out, where the hell are we gonna get some trade? Our Belgians didn't like French francs, but we found an enlisted man, an enlisted soldier, American, and literally we talked him to taking our French francs and giving us some Belgian. So we went back to the Red Cross and said, now we got some francs, will you find us a room? They found us a room. No, we split up. I'm not sure where the two to the 48th went, but Mark and I were sent by the British Red Cross to a room above a bar. And we somehow managed on public transportation to get to the right bar. This gets funny. I always laugh when I tell this story because it's true. And it's so cold, and we got this nice room above the bar, and they quieted down early in the morning. So we thought we were getting to sleep when we discovered there's a room next to us, and separating the two rooms was very thin plywood, and there's a British soldier making love to a Belgian girl. And you know, when the lights are out, it's just like they were in the same room. True story, Scout's honor. We didn't get much sleep that night. I hope I'm not offending you by telling this story.
No, sir.
Turn it around.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. We started having reunions,
Turn it around.
and this was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the printing may be on there, but one of our pilots organized it, and this is one of the best made. Most of them are out of polyester, but this is a better grade.
Turn so we can see it there.
And we really
Robert.
like this. I have two, because I saved one. I'll donate it to a museum, but it's a great hat. And we had a nice reunion. I'm not sure just when we started the reunions, but I went to two reunions while my wife and I liked to travel. We'd only go to a reunion that was in a place we wanted to visit. And there was the P-47 Pilots Association, which was established in 1966. And they held a reunion every year, and they got large group. I mean, they came. In fact, we had pilots would come to the reunion from France, because we had given them our P-47s.
100 of them, probably 100
Yeah.
pilots.
And so we just used it to visit places we were going to visit anyway. And I had retired early from government service, and I had a fair income, so no problem. So anyway, that was enjoyable. We did a lot of traveling while we could.
Now tell us about this plane that I'm looking at right there. There's a center plane that's yours, made by an artist. Tell us about that, Robert.
I think I'm trying to, it was in April of 1945. You know, a lot of misinformed people think that as the Germans were pushed more and more from the west and the Soviets from the east, the war was winding down. Wars never wind down. They explode with a bang. And we were sent to attack a German base. And we normally went in on a low strafing run. I'm trying to remember. We apparently the spotter plane knew that within a forest area there was a base. So we went in, and we literally threw our bombs in, and then the lead guy and I would follow at a safe distance, and then we'd peel off to safety. Well, normally when you attacked an airfield like that, the leader will alert them, and by the time the wingman came behind him, they had their anti-aircraft file up and running, and there's no question about it, the wingman was in more danger than the element leader. But in this case, they hit this guy.
The top guy.
Right. And so when he came out smoking, he radioed me, come up as close as you can and tell me where the smoke is. That was a big mistake. When I came up and got close to him, the plane exploded and he came flying out of the cockpit, and I was untouched. So we learned later he had been badly burned. He wasted time when he contacted me. When there's smoke, there's fire, and he delayed, and he was terribly burned. And he landed in area controlled by an SS division, and the Soviets were giving him a fit. He landed there badly burned.
Landed or exit?
By parachute.
Parachute.
He landed there by parachute, and the SS troops ignored him. There was also an Air Corps colonel who was a P-38 group commander that had parachuted there in good shape. He tried to get the SS to get Russell, his name was Russell Francis, Russell to a hospital. No way. They knew if they couldn't stop the Soviets, they were going to be executed. So he tried to get Russell to a hospital, and they wouldn't even let him. So Russell died. The Air Corps colonel was untouched, and of course he survived the war. Well, we got word what happened, that he died of his burns, from the Soviets after they finally defeated the SS and controlled the area. So we had a good solid report on what happened to him. And he burned to death, and he was in terrible shape.
If he'd ejected sooner before the fire got too bad, he might have survived.
That's right.
Yeah.
So anyway, we learned what happened to him. That was it. So I was a member of the P-47 Association, and some years after the war, and I think we were, I'd say anywhere from 5 to 10 years ago, I just got to thinking that if I was a member of the 9th Air Force Association, perhaps that colonel was too. So I have the membership book, and boy, it's thick. And I looked him up. Yes, he lived just outside Washington. There was his telephone number, and I picked up the phone and I called him. I got him on the phone. So I told him why I called him, and I wanted him to confirm what happened to Francis when he died. He confirmed it. That's exactly what happened. We couldn't do anything to help him, and he died. He suffered from the burns.
This is about the painting, Robert.
Yes.
Explain it.
We were living in Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles from Chambersburg. one day we were shopping in Chambersburg, and an art gallery had a painting of a P-51 Mustang. And obviously the guy was good. I mean, he was not a professional, but sometimes amateurs are good. So I tracked him down. He lived in Chambersburg. I said, hey, you did a great painting of a Mustang. You think you could paint a P-47? He said, hell yes. He says, give me a photograph of what you want and how you want it. So I did, and I described exactly what happened here. And I wanted a painting of me flying up close to the P-47 that was smoking. Well, he says, okay, I'll do a sketch and before we start the painting. And he did the sketch, and I says, wrong. He had me on the wrong side. So, I don't know what he did. He turned it over or something. Okay, I'll have you on the right side. Well, he was good. And anyway,
They have those numbers in there that tells you it's either made in Farmington, New York, or in Evansville, Indiana. I think one of them is Evansville, Indiana. There's a number on there.
I believe he copied the exact numbers from the photograph I gave him, but that's the result. And now, look at this. Okay, do you know the story of Bill Preddy, the fighter ace?
No.
Well, he was one of the top aces of Europe, and he lived down the road in Greensboro. And I graduated from flight school with his brother, Bill Preddy, so I got to know, what was his first name? Jim Preddy, JP. He was one of the top aces. Unfortunately, he was chasing a German plane, and the guy went down on the deck, and Preddy went after him, but the damn American gunner hit Preddy and actually shot him down and killed him. Bill Preddy, when he heard his brother had died, I'm not sure what unit he was with, but he was flying P-51s in Europe. He took off on his own. He was going to get even with the Germans, and he never came back. They never saw him again.
Lost both of them then.
Lost both of them.
Oh, boy.
And I wrote an article about that, and how the parents lost both brothers.
Shoot.
But anyway, where were we?
Okay, Robert, we've got a bunch of silhouettes of planes. In the war, it happens a lot of times that people will shoot their own aircraft down, so you had to learn to be, or learn to understand silhouettes. Can you tell us how they taught you about silhouettes in the war?
That training came up in primary flight training. I remember it because that's the first 9 months of training in the BT-19, and we had a civilian teacher that taught, it was called aircraft identification. And he did not use anything like this. He used a slide projector, and we would supposedly learn to identify him. Then he would test us by putting a slide in of the silhouette of, say, of a twin-engine Luftwaffe 262 or a BT-13 or whatever the plane was, and we had to identify the silhouette. Well, he was a pretty interesting guy, very nice civilian instructor, and the way he kept our attention, young flyers are very restless on the ground. While he was showing these silhouettes, he would slip in unexpectedly a slide of a naked woman.
Wake him up real quick.
We could identify what it was. Okay, that's a true story.
He knew what he was doing, didn't he? Okay.
We,
This is a bomb that was on the bottom of P-47. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Robert?
oh, okay, we're scheduled for a mission. And we knew ahead of time you were scheduled for a mission the next day at a certain time, place. So we couldn't drink the night before. That's standard practice. But anyway, so we would gather at the appointed time in the flight room with a briefing by the intelligence officer. Now we're all dressed with flight suits and oxygen masks and P-47 sidearm, and we carried a knife. And people always said, "What did you do with the knife?" And we explained, sometimes you have to cut your way out of a parachute. That was why you had a knife. Okay, we settled that. So anyway, we got a briefing. Now those scheduled for, in the briefing, the intelligence officer identified what your position would be in the flight and all that. We flew in flights of 4, or really 2 flights of 2 each, because you had an element leader and a wingman, and I was never an element leader. I didn't have enough experience. So you would find out and I've got a list of everybody I flew with, where we went and how long it took, and what we claimed we did. That's standard. And the intelligence officer at the end of the war gave me a copy of his report. So that's good to have, because when I want to know exactly where I went and what I claimed, I've got the list. And the longest flight, I think, was almost 5 hours. But that was because we let the Germans retreat faster than we could keep up with them. And I would say on the average, my flight was more or less of 2 hours. And we moved, after I flew combat, we moved twice. Once, my first station at St. Tron, Belgium, and then when the Germans our flights got longer, they put down a metal strip just before the Rhine River, as I remember it. And fortunately, my last flight out of St. Tron, I blew a tire and didn't tear up the plane, but it went up on its nose, and the propeller was a little bent.
A little scary to be on your nose.
So anyway, I think the operation officer, who became a wonderful post-war friend, decided that I was getting a little flak happy because I flew one of the last aircraft off the strip at St. Tron to go to this temporary base, and he met me when I taxied in, and he said, "Huddleston, how would you like to go down on the Riviera for a week?" And I said, "No, sir." You don't want to go?" "Yes, sir, I don't want to go. I want to stay and fly with my buddies." "That's made up." He said, "You want me to go to the Riviera?" And I said, "I'll go."
Yeah.
So the next day, I think I stayed on that temporary strip one night, and they had a small cargo plane. I don't know what it was, but it could take about 3 or 4 passengers. So from my squadron went me and my buddy Mark O'Connor, the flight officer. And then there was several. Well, the Air Corps in Cannes, France, had taken over the Martinez Hotel first class. Next door was the Carlton and the ground officers. But we had a week stay in the Martinez, and when we checked in, just like any tourist, we had to check in, sign the register, the elderly bellhop with white gloves would take our baggage and show Mark and I to our room. From then on, we were on our own, and we would dine in the hotel. It was a fancy hotel.
Is that in
believe me.
May of 45 or
It's now
after Vida?
April 45
April.
because I was on the Riviera when President Roosevelt died.
So
So it's in April.
he died April 1st of 45. Or April 14th. He died on Easter Sunday. Yeah. April 1st. Yeah.
No, he died April 12th.
April 12th. Okay. You're
Okay,
right.
I think I'm right.
No, you're right.
Anyway, we registered, we dined, and it was sort of interesting because it was a fancy hotel, and we had our meals in there, and I think Mark and I and a couple other officers are seated at the table, and we're served. You didn't order from a menu. They served you the meal of the day, and they served this thing on a fancy platter, and the waiter had white gloves on. Underneath the covering, it was Spam. They got all their provisions from the Air Corps, but we had a nice week there. The beach wasn't that fancy. I thought it would be a gorgeous sandy, very rocky beach. But boy, that was upscale living, and we had a nice stay. And
Oh,
I think I looked up once, and I had about 27 by the time I got that leave, and when I went back, I had to do 9 more. I ended up with 36 combat missions, but that was one of the lucky draws.
in that picture in front of you, it's got a bomb on the bottom. Did you ever carry a bomb in any of your P-47s?
Routinely carried 2 bombs.
And before you came back and landed, did you always dropped them before you came back?
If you didn't, they would like to shoot you down. One of my colleagues had a hung-up bomb, and he made the mistake of landing, and it blew up. He survived, but he got hit in the side of the head by some of the flak. If a bomb was hung up, you worked like hell to shake it loose, and they didn't want you to bring it back to the field.
Right.
You bail out. You can't give up the plane because you couldn't crash land with it. So
You just click a button and it drop, or how did you release those bombs?
It had that ring,
Uh-huh.
and somehow it got stuck, and the only thing you could do was just try to shake it loose. I never had the problem. I never had one hang up. So
Of 1943.
Ooh.
And he's given a P-47 to one of the workers there.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We made probably the plane that saved your life in World War II. And
I was still in.
that'd been April 45. He went around the country at that time. Look at all these factories.
Oh,
About
April 45.
No, April 43. You were still in training then.
Yeah.
But he still probably made the plane there.
Yeah, that's great.
Let me as an example in front of Bob there of a plane, how tough it was, and he come back. They're very difficult to knock down. Can you just tell us how reliable that plane was when you flew it?
I'm trying to focus on a starting point. I'm trying to remember the name of a test pilot who was asked to force rank all the fighters, all the propeller fighters of World War II. And I was so pleased to find out he named the P-47 as number 1. And he did it on the basis number 1. It was so well made and so well, it could survive almost anything that a young juvenile pilot could do to it. And I'm not using his words, but he's saying it's the toughest fighter aircraft in the business. And it was, and let's just be honest, radial engines are better in combat than liquid cooled. Now those liquid cooled inline engines make a beautiful aircraft, but if they lose that liquid, they're finished. And you could shoot holes in this engine, and if they could keep some of those pistons pumping, you stayed alive. And there's no doubt about it. The radial engine was best, and that's why so many were made and equipped the 9th Air Force, because they knew that they were going to be subject to continuing ground fire from the Germans. Now remember, the war didn't die out. It ended with a bang because those 88 millimeter anti-aircraft guns were mobile. And they were used as artillery, they were used as ACAT guns, they were used as tank guns. And when the Germans recruited, that 88 millimeter gun went with them. So by the time I got there, you found more protecting key sites than they had at the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, because those mobile anti-aircraft flocked to protect the German airfields. You couldn't move the airfields, but you could create new ones off the Autobahn, and they were the best protectors.
This gentleman in the center here is Alan Sanderson. He was on our board. His wife is now on our board, but he flew 118 missions. He flew in North Africa, then Italy, and then over
the P-40 in North Africa.
He did fly the P-40 in North Africa. He did do the P-40 like you did.
Did he fly off the aircraft carrier?
He never told us that he flew off the aircraft carrier, but he flew the P-40. Then in Italy, he flew off an island there, and then did a little bit of the invasion of D-Day, came over to help support. But he had 118 missions, and the little guy in the center, and we had these two P-47s. There are two of the 14 left flying. They came to our museum, and one's a Hungry Hunter, or a Hun Hunter, and the other one's called Willie the Wabbit.
Yeah, I know that Hun Hunter. I have a photograph. Now this, you can check this out, but my understanding is the weakness of the P-47 was it gulped so much gas.
Yeah, five gallons a minute can be, and it just couldn't escort all the fighters over there. But its statistics beat the P-51 by far. And what you said, air cooled. Every fighter plane in World War II was water cooled except for the Fokker and the P-47. So what you said about air cooled, it can just take all kinds of hits. And a tremendous plane.
You just stole my steam. I was just going
You
to say
said that.
that when the Mustang finally came in with its long legs, every unit in the 8th Air Force but one converted to Mustangs, and one refused to give up their P-47s. What group was it?
Your group.
No, the 56.
56.
And they had more aerial victories than any P-51 group. That's a fact.
And they're the one they knew their P-47. Isn't that
They
interesting?
loved
Fits it. Fact.
It's how you use it.
Yeah.
If you know how to use your aircraft, you know how to take advantage of your strengths and eliminate your weaknesses.
The toolie, not the tool. But Bob had to practice with these planes, and there's this sighting on the plane, the P-47, probably one of them that was made in Evansville, Indiana. That's the sighting on his right side there, our right side, and then they see the bullets, the casings coming out of there. 23 seconds, all the bullets were gone, and so when you came back after you strafed, you didn't have any bullets left if you shot everything. So you were, all 9 yards were gone, and that's where that term came from, all 9 yards. Now, what did it feel like when you shot those bullets? Did it feel pretty powerful, or what did you feel like?
It was probably less of a second, but you could feel the plane actually slowed down. Now, when a small part of a second, you feel it, sort of the strength of the repercussions of the eighth. And a Marine gave me a copy of one of the 50 calibers. And a lot of people don't understand. You put 8 of those on an airplane, you got power, and you can just feel the plane with a slight. I call it slowing down, but it just.
Yeah. How about when you dropped the bomb? What did the plane feel like after you dropped the bomb?
Well, of course, you could, yeah, you did light and low. And as to say, we always had to make sure we understood that you had to drop that bomb because that plane was going to mush into the ground if you didn't. Now, after I can't remember the group, but there's a story about before D-Day, the P-47 units were ordered to destroy the bridges leading up to Normandy so the Germans couldn't bring up reinforcements.
They do that with bullets or strafing or do it with bombs?
Don't get ahead of me.
I'm not. Sorry.
Now, the job was first assigned to bombers, and they got over the bridges and dropped bombs, and all it did was dent in the surface of the bridge. You had to knock out the underpinnings. And the way they actually practiced in Texas to send in P-47s that could literally throw a 1,000-pound bomb at the underpinning of a bridge. You got me? You with me?
Yeah.
You had to actually, bombing from straight down didn't do a damn thing. You had to knock out the underpinning, and you had to escape the blast. Can I put these down? They're getting heavy. Writing, and I wanted to know how they destroyed the bridges leading up to Normandy, and they practiced in Texas. They couldn't carry 2,000-pound bombers, and a 500 was so. They just had this 1,000-pound bomb, and they practiced in Texas where he would fly in low and literally release that bomb, and the speed would keep that bomb going into the underpinning while he peeled away. Because that blast, if he didn't, that 1,000-pounder could down him. But that's. I don't know. I wrote up an article about that. But that was a contribution of the P-47 to the D-Day invasion. Now, I've got a friend that in Florida, Floyd Blair. There was the captain at the time, and he was one of the P-47 pilots that joined in escorting Eisenhower from England to Paris. He was surrounded. There was no way a Luftwaffe could get at his cargo plane. I don't know what plane he was in. He might have been in a medium bomb. I don't really remember. But Floyd was in on that, and I've been trying my darndest to get Floyd to write a story. If he'll draft it, I'll complete it, but he's too damn modest. But destroying those bridges was well thought out and apparently quite successful.
Well, I'll tell you, Robert, you're a wealth of information. You worked for NASA after you got out and the military, and we can't thank you enough for the time you spent with us today. We're from the Evansville Wartime Museum, and we're trying to preserve the heritage of P-47s. We have one of them on display. It's called Hoosier Spirit 2. Hoosier Spirit 1 was the first one off our assembly line on September 17, 1942, and we named the second one Hoosier Spirit 2. But any of your friends and things, we love their support. Any artifacts, we have our curator with us today, and she preserves all the artifacts and makes sure they're going to be remembered by future generations. And what you just told us, we'll have it on video. We'll put it on our archives. We'll put it on our YouTube channel, and people will hear you talk, and you'll be a special thing for years to come, and we want to preserve this for posterity.
Okay, now I'll make a response and a promise. On November 2, my book will come out, which is the story of my life. It's called A Remarkable Life, and that was chosen by the publisher because she said you did have a rather remarkable life. I will gladly give you a copy, and if you think visitors might be interested, I will gladly donate any number you would like, and you can keep the royalties. You can give me a new eyesight, but you don't have to give me any money. You can keep all the royalties, but I'll order as many as you think you can sell. It's a donation.
We'd love to have that, and we'll put it on sale at our bookstore. Mr. Tieman's in charge of our bookstore, and,
Good.
he'll accept, or at least 10, but they're going to go like hotcakes. So
I won't guarantee it until I read the copy myself. I'll get the last manuscript to check next Monday.
Okay.
So when I finally have a copy in hand, then I'll send you.
thank you.